investigate this reality. Their objective? To find out to which extent the white continent is today a silent victim of humans. On board, notably, is Laurence de la Ferrière, the only woman to have done a solo crossing of Antarctica in its entirety.
I've been walking for 8 hours.
That was more than 20 years ago. By her side is Eric Loizeau. Route du Rhum, Transat's solo Atlantic record holder, this Breton sailor has faced many storms all over the world. Despite his track record, Antarctica is a first for him.
You have to be able to improvise. For one's quick improvisation, depending on how the wind turns. And especially there, the way the ice is moving. Because now we're in December, which is summer, so the ice is melting, etc. So the ice is drifting with the currents. It amasses in certain spots, so there are places we shouldn't go. And then we'll see how it goes, because this trip is a real adventure.
Drifting ice. Bottomless anchorages, strong and unpredictable winds. A voyage full of unknowns. But by the end of it, Eric and Laurence intend to come back with answers to their questions. What impact do humans have on this part of the planet? And above all, is Antarctica still a land of peace and science? In this adventure, Eric and Laurence have been joined by other enthusiasts and a scientist. Hélène Dubrasquet is a young French biologist who moved to Chile 5 years ago to research marine flora in Antarctica. Alain Blanc is a Swiss adventurer. He is there to test the solar-powered kayak from the Planet Solar Foundation. During their 6-week expedition, this catamaran, which is the pride of its owners, Maria and Alejandro, will be their floating base. This Argentinian couple has brought with them Duarte, Andre, and Rita. And there's Eugenio, who knows the Antarctic Peninsula well, having been a sailor in the Argentinian Navy. Before encountering their first icebergs, there is one passage they must cross, one of the most dreaded by sailors, Drake Passage, the gateway to the White Continent. 3 days of navigation, which can be intense. It's there where the Southern, Pacific, and Atlantic Oceans meet, where all these currents join together with no land to tame the powerful waves.
So here we're above the 50th parallel, which sailors used to call the Furious 50s, due to the sound of the wind and the roar of the ocean. But it's not the case today, thank goodness. The conditions are typical of southern oceans. A gray sea with a fairly low sky. In the good old days, we did all the navigation with a sextant. So with the sun and the moon and the stars. And it's true that it was complicated in the southern latitudes because actually we didn't have a lot of sun during the day. Typically today we've had 2 or 3 moments when we could tell our position by the sun.
And today, the computer's predictions do not bode well. During storms, Drake's fierce waves can reach up to 33 feet high. Eugenio is dreading them.
Bad weather takes here. It's not just in the middle of this passage. I prefer near the islands.
The conditions are average. Actually, a depression is going to cross our path. However, if we're fast enough, we can pass in front of the depression, and then we'll be fine. But that means we have to go quickly now. It's never an easy place, and conditions are rarely ideal throughout the passage. I always say that too many screens are overkill. That is, they make decision-making difficult. It's complicated when you have screens everywhere. The forecast that we had yesterday has changed in relation to what we have today, so in just 24 hours. There you have it. We need to take that into account too, and it's complicated to manage. It's for that reason that when we had nothing, it was a lot simpler, because we didn't have too many questions to ask as regards the evolution of the weather and how it was going to work out and all that. So let's see what we're going to do.
The conditions have been clement. Drake's Passage is now behind them. If after a 50-year career, Eric continues to travel the seas of the globe, it's no longer to race for trophies, but to wage war against one of the biggest enemies of nature, plastic. Ambassador for the Environmental Foundation, Race for Water, he takes samples during each of his expeditions.
So the goal of this manta net is to take a sample of seawater, which will then be sent to Dutch researchers for analysis in a laboratory to establish to which extent the sea is polluted in Drake's Passage. It's a place where very few surveys are done. Plastic pollution is huge. We can't imagine how bad it is. And it's not really what we see. It's not the plastic bags floating on the surface of the water. It's all a dissolution of plastic that make microplastic fragments which impact the plankton. And as we have become aware recently, it impacts all marine wildlife.
Samples that Eric will continue to collect for the duration of the expedition.
Okay.
There's no more net.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Good grief.
Do you have a second one?
No, I don't have another one. I think that with the pressure of the water, the thing is broken. And so as a consequence, we've lost the container. It's a bit worrying because that's something we can't replace.
As you'd expect from good sailors, Eric and André do the repairs with the materials they have on hand. A bit of DIY and imagination enables them to recreate the essentials with a container found on the boat.
I get the impression that our device has worked wonders thanks to our bit of DIY.
Hélène, the biologist, analyzes the contents of the net drag and identifies certain debris.
The problem is that you're not going to see it. It's blue. It's a little blue thing.
But with the naked eye, it's difficult to determine the exact nature of the debris. Each year, more than 8 million tons of plastic are dumped into our oceans. And Antarctica hasn't been spared. The circumpolar current, which flows around it, carries up to 150 million cubic meters of water per second, 150 times the flow of all the rivers in the world, thus draining en masse pollution coming from the other oceans. A threat whose tangible consequences for the biodiversity of one of the last marine sanctuaries is not yet known. Even thousands of miles away, humans are damaging the flora and fauna. Humans have always wanted to leave their mark on the entire surface of the Earth. And the White Continent has not been left out. The history is recent but substantial. 2 centuries of exploration, of conquests, and numerous epic tales that have become myths.
It's so easy to find. A light.
As is the case with this first land which has appeared on the horizon, Elephant Island, a name inseparable from that of the great British explorer Ernest Shackleton, whose crew found refuge there after their boat sank in 1915 after being trapped in the ice and crushed. After more than 2 years of drifting, the exhausted survivors reached the island with practically no resources. While waiting for the return of Shackleton, who had left to find help, the rest of the crew had to wait 4 months on the windswept coast, with just 2 canoes overturned on the frozen ground for protection. Despite the dangers and the suffering, they all returned alive.
It's such a mythical place, and I find coming here really moving, especially when I think about the lives of the people on this island, waiting to be rescued.
Sheer cliffs, hostile lands where no anchorage is sheltered. The conditions on this island are not very favorable to human life. From here, Antarctica seems unconquerable. And yet, heading south, the crew sets off to meet the people who have settled here. King George Island, named by the British Captain William Smith in honor of his monarch, King George III. The explorer discovered Antarctica in 1819. 200 years later, there are hundreds of men and women here from different backgrounds and nationalities. Among them, climatologists, meteorologists, biologists. These are the guardians of global warming. Approaching the coast, nature reveals itself to us in all its glory. A fragile beauty. In less than 30 years, the southern continent has lost 3,000 billion tons of ice, impacting sea level by nearly 1 centimeter and strongly influencing the salinity of ocean waters. And what will the future hold with temperatures rising 2 or 3 times faster in the polar regions than in the rest of the world? This is one of the questions haunting a large number of scientists, including those on this boat chartered by Homeward Bound, an organization promoting women in science. For more than 15 days, over 100 researchers observe, discuss, communicate.
By staying on the boat for 18 days, we're forging very strong links between several disciplines.
Do you have another location lined up for next year?
Every year they select 100 women from around the world to take to Antarctica. And we'll continue to be part of the program for the next 10 years, possibly longer.
So we're really here to observe climate change. It's a place which is natural, which might even be the last natural place in the world. And yet it's a place that is very heavily impacted by climate change. So the North Pole and the South Pole are places where the global warming of the atmosphere and the ocean is felt the most. And yet, when you look outside, you see glaciers. It's really natural. It's really impressive. However, it's where humans impact nature the most. So as humans on Earth, this global warming that we feel is less than 3% of total global warming, so it's very small. Global warming takes place in the ocean, and the ocean takes upon its shoulders to try and save the planet, but this ocean is out of breath.
Nevertheless, the White Continent is well and truly protected. It remains the only place on Earth that doesn't belong to anyone. This was the great promise of the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959 with the objective of preserving these austral lands from humans and their desire to conquest. It was signed by the 12 nations which had scientific programs on the continent. Since then, 42 other countries have adhered to this pledge. About 30 of them have established stations here. Each signatory can freely establish research stations wherever they see fit on the continent. But is it really only science that drives these countries to plant a flag here? King George Island is home to the largest concentration of scientific stations in Antarctica, around 10 or so. Obviously, this is for convenience. Here, we are less than 600 miles from the tip of South America, the shortest distance between a continent and Antarctica. 2 days by sea, or 2 hours by plane. First stop, Carlini, an Argentinian base established in 1953, even before the signing of the treaty. Here, researchers take turns all year round, biologists, meteorologists, or oceanographers.
128.3. You can explain us what you are doing now with...
We're measuring the penetration of light in the column of water, and with the CTD, we're measuring the depth, salinity, water turbidity, and temperature.
But is science really the sole motivation of Argentina, a country historically established here? Laurence is expecting a lot from their first visit.
It's quite moving to have contact with the first base.
The adventurer has not only crossed Antarctica. In 2009, she managed the French base there, Dumont d'Urville. A sharp eye to investigate the real motivations of the other countries present here.
Roughly, how many people live on the base?
Right now, there are 44 people. In the winter, there are 25.
It was the same at Dumont d'Urville.
Last summer, our numbers increased to 80.
Argentina counts 13 settlements on the continent, the most of any country. 6 stations are occupied all year round, like this one at Carlini. Some scientists take up residence for projects which last more than a year. A presence that causes damage. And that's one of the reasons why Lucas, a microbiologist, has been sent here.
This is my 8th time here. So what I do is to try to restore soil from contamination when we have some fuel spills, maybe, because everything here is powered by fuel. So there are spills, and now and then, and we use the bacteria and the fungi in soil in order to degrade that fuel and restore the environment. That is one of the ideas here in Antarctica.
You are working on plastic pollution?
This year there's a group coming to work with microplastics.
Yes.
They are trying to determine if there are microplastics here in the cove, which we are most certainly...
You have the result of the...
No, not yet. This is the first year they are coming.
Yes, because we took some sampling.
Macroplastics are usual already, and a lot of penguins were found with plastics in their stomachs, and this is quite usual. Microplastics is like a new topic, and people are starting to work on that.
Hélène takes advantage of the microscopes at the base to find out a little more about the water samples taken on the boat.
There's debris from lots of things. That could be, I don't know, paint residue? You see, it's a bit transparent. I don't really know what it is, but it's not natural. It's solid. Look what happens if I increase the light. Look, this is nylon. In our net, we have at the same time the planktonic community, which is predominantly represented by the diatom and the presence of marine debris. This is probably debris stemming from human activities here in the area. It's difficult to know the origin and composition of microplastics just with a microscopic view. All that blue stuff there.
Contamination during the sampling or from the external environment? Further laboratory analysis will reveal more.
From which place the plastic come here?
The presence of humans mostly is an hypothesis. We are not sure, but we think that most of it comes from our staying here.
Missions here last several long months, and the men are happy to enjoy certain traditions and celebrations typical of their country. And in Argentina, on Sundays, it's asado.
Me siento en casa.
I feel like I'm at home because asado and Antarctica. It's unreal. You have to see it to believe it.
Argentina is proud of its traditions and even more proud of its territories. And we're going to find out a bit more about the underlying reasons for the presence of this country in Antarctica.
The main thing and the most important thing here, and we can see in red the Argentina's claim over Antarctica, which is practically the same as the one of Chile and Great Britain.
Before signing the treaty, 7 countries, including France, claimed a piece of the territory. These claims are frozen today, but certain nations intend on keeping one foot firmly planted in Antarctica.
So each country claims a part of Antarctica, and the science that we do here is in order to support that claim.
Using science for means of geopolitical ambition. This is confirmed by Eugenio, the Argentinian ex-soldier.
All the bases, there is a reason.
Yeah, for sure.
The reason is the science. And
Plus
something
something political,
yes, because
Yeah.
all the countries are more issues political than science.
Yeah.
And to impose their presence in Antarctica, certain countries are willing to make substantial investments. A few miles from the Argentinians, the explorers visit the most high-tech base of the trip, that of South Korea. Here, they constructed their first base in 1988, which has since been entirely renovated. The country is investing 45 million euros each year in its Antarctica program. A very technological, but also very original scientific base. Inside, Eric discovers another vision of the world.
He's here, yes. And
as viewed by several Southern Hemisphere countries.
It's the first time that I've seen a map upside down. It's funny to see it like that, with the south in the north and the north in the south. This is their Antarctic station.
The station leader is very proud to show off his facilities. Research laboratories, but also soilless cultivation to enhance meals during the long months spent here, far from their families. That's the price to pay for witnessing firsthand the consequences of global warming in Antarctica.
so at that time, this glacier front line was right here.
Okay.
Okay, right here, like this. But in 32 years, we lost this much glaciers already.
Incredible.
All right?
Yeah.
Which is
Okay.
very, very tragic.
Yeah. And do you like to be here?
I love it.
You love it? Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
But
How
right
many
now-
times?
Well, as a summer scientist, I was here about 6 times maybe. But over winter, this was the first time.
It's the first time.
Yeah.
So,
I'm excited to going home back in a week.
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
A field of research which is much coveted. Territorial conquests, but also and above all, the quest for resources. Antarctica is said to contain 20% of the world's reserves of petrol and natural gas. Today, nobody can explore or exploit this land, thanks to the Madrid Protocol signed in 1991. But what if certain countries want to get their hands on the treasures of the White Continent one day? Arrival on Bellingshausen Station, one of 7 Russian stations established in Antarctica. The Madrid Protocol is due to be reopened for review in 2048. Certain people are worried that it will be undermined, particularly by Russia.
Okay, he will be much later. You better go to Souvenir and
So there will be one specific person who will tell us everything.
Okay.
That's what Laurence would like to understand during the visit. But for that, she needs to meet the station leader. A real treasure hunt, which starts in the souvenir shop, run by the doctor. The station leader is still nowhere to be found. Laurence and her colleagues are guided towards the hospital for a site visit. There's still no station leader in sight. In the meantime, Eric takes the opportunity to observe the oceanographer at work. Finally, the visit ends with the station's jewel, the Orthodox Church, with the priest there in person.
There is no special technique.
To see the higher authority, the advice is to come back another day.
I don't hold out much hope of learning anything more. We'd eventually need to snoop around, but we're constantly under surveillance. We're constantly being followed by someone. Maybe we'll discover more by spending time at some other stations.
A few miles away, Laurence and her companions are heading towards the neighboring Chinese base camp. With 4 existing stations and another one under construction, China is also weaving its web. As a country in search of raw materials, its expansion in Antarctica worries some researchers.
Why did you decide to come in Antarctica? Why China? Not you, not you personally, but why China decide to build a scientific station in Antarctica? Do you have a... Okay. So is it particularly interesting for the biology, penguins, or?
Largely concentrated on the science in Antarctica.
Laurence and her companions won't get to see much more than this museum. But the adventurer would like to find out more about the reason why China and Russia are blocking the creation of new marine areas around Antarctica.
Some countries wanted to protect that part of ocean close to Antarctica, and you decide not to do it. Could you explain to me why?
Not to do what?
To make that part of ocean protected in the treaty.
In the treaty, yes.
Yeah.
So
At the Chinese station, such issues are not discussed with foreigners.
The conversation was falling on deaf ears. Impossible to get a single answer. We can't meet any scientists because they're outside. Conveniently, they're all outside today. We can't visit the labs because they're too cluttered, and it might disturb the research. And yet, we're within a territory that doesn't belong to anyone, which is supposed to be dedicated to science and peace. And I think that it's a modus vivendi, a status quo, but which doesn't reflect the reality on the ground.
Without receiving any further explanations, our adventurers carry on westbound towards other stations. Maria, the owner of the boat, has a personal interest in one of them.
Hello, can you hear me? From here, I can see what you told me was your bedroom. The first window on the right. My dad lived here for 1 year in 1955. I'm feeling very emotional. This window is where his bedroom used to be. Incredible.
Empty most of the time, Argentinian soldiers come and open this site a dozen or so days every year to dust off their flag. They maintain a few of their sites in a similar fashion. Unlike humans, some inhabitants enjoy the beaches all year round. Penguins are the symbols of Antarctica, where their population is at its largest. On land, their walk is comical, but underwater, they're formidable swimmers. heading for the neighboring island Livingston and its Bulgarian base. It has one of the smallest budgets in southern research. It used to be supported by its big sister Russia at the end of the 1980s. Here, very few electronics, but it will be the warmest reception of the entire trip.
The base leader was telling me that when they set off for their missions, they already know each other. There are generally no more than 1 or 2 new people leaving with them, and it's a team whose solidarity grows with each campaign. That's another thing that's very different in comparison to the French. When we leave for a campaign, let's say at Dumont d'Urville, it's practically just newcomers systematically every single time.
It's a 21 time for me, 21. And this is the first base. It's a Bulgarian. And we started with geology here. After that, meteorology, glaciology, biology, many branches of science we know. Geophysicists and so, many.
This base is a good example of small sites without a big budget, keen to make their presence in Antarctica known.
The communications is very, very important. And this is the, how to say, this is the part of the work of our work. As you told you, all of us have when we come back in Bulgaria, we have the meetings in the schools, the lectures, and so on and so on. We, in the schools, in the universities, and on some different kind of societies.
He told me that they have lots of problems clearing the rubbish. You can see all these drums, all the stuff they've got here. In fact, they're trying to reach an agreement with the Chilean or Argentinian authorities to get boats to come and collect it. And they'll pay for it and clear the bases of all the scrap metal, all the stuff that they have no idea what to do with.
This is the price to pay for keeping these places of unique beauty intact. Laurence and Eric head off to take some snow samples. These samples will be analyzed at the IPGP. The Paris Institute of Earth Physics has already detected, not far from there, substances originating from other continents. Micronutrients transported by the atmosphere which potentially impact the plankton. A real carbon dioxide pump, an essential element of human life on Earth. In the meantime, Hélène is looking for algae that come from elsewhere.
I'm going to take a sample with a swab, which means that I'm going to scrape the surface of the rock to collect propagules of the green algae. Propagules are baby algae that settle on a substrate. That's actually the start of the growth. And then I'll put that in a little pouch. And we'll closely analyze the DNA back at the lab. The goal of this experiment is to find out what species of algae is growing on the rocks at the moment. I'm trying to find out if an invasive species called Ulva intestinalis is present.
An invasive species which has recently turned up in Antarctica.
I think I found it. Hooray! Here we've just found some Ulva intestinalis. That's the very species I'm looking for.
This is the beginning of her research to understand their origin and their proliferation, and also the long-term risks to the ecosystem. Not far from there, some British researchers have also discovered several species of invasive insects. natural barriers have been destroyed by humans. And that pattern might well accelerate due to the increase in maritime traffic in these waters, notably through tourism. Cruise ships have also been riding the polar wave for nearly 60 years. To avoid these sites being trampled, the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators encouraged their members to prohibit disembarkation for ships with over 500 passengers. Efforts to make tourism more responsible. But today, there's no quota limiting the number of visitors in Antarctica. There were 2,000 per year in the 1980s. Today, it's more than 55,000. And one of the unmissable destinations for tourists is Deception Island. Before becoming the must-stop spot for cruise ships, a little more than a century ago, the island was a base for whaling ships. The remnants give a glimpse of the devastation humans imposed on this mammal, hunted for its oil, which was used to fuel lamps and heating on the other continents.
We assume that they used to put the whale oil inside. They were probably butchering the whales here, then putting the oil in the drums, and then boats would come to take them, to transport them.
Fortunately for the species, humans discovered substitute products and abandoned this unfair hunt in the 1930s. The team leaves this place full of memories. And in an ironic turn of fate, a family of whales comes dancing in front of the bow of the boat. So far, one of the most beautiful sights witnessed on this long trip. The crew has already traveled more than 1,200 miles since the Falkland Islands, and every day they penetrate a little deeper into the White Continent to discover new research stations. And the next part of the adventure is far from relaxing. This time around, Eric, Laurence, and their fellow travelers can't escape the uncertainties of Antarctic navigation. A slalom between icebergs and fearsome growlers. These blocks of ice hidden between two waves. And Eric is not immune to the odd surprise.
Dede, put the map back up. So we'll enter like that to sail the boat there. But actually it's there. So there, this island is wrongly positioned, meaning the map is wrong. According to the map, we should be on an island when visibly, look, we're on the water floating. That's when you realize that the cartography on these shores is rather average, as our GPS location is correct. The boat is at the right spot on the map, except that the map is wrong. We should be at sea, but it places us on land.
Despite the boat's sophistication, vigilance is still required before the arrival at the next stop, one of the most beautiful sights in Antarctica, Primavera, the location of another Argentinian base. Very close to a specially protected area, which is notably to conserve these moss and lichens, on which, incidentally, it's forbidden to walk. But that doesn't prevent hundreds of gallons of oil from being stocked and used here.
It's crazy. There's not a single solar panel. There's not even an attempt to do anything. And you've got other stations which are much more advanced in this respect when, in my opinion, this is one of the most beautiful, at least it's located in one of the most beautiful spots, with millions of penguins all around. And well, it reeks of diesel oil, and there's an extraordinary noise. So, yeah, it's a bit contradictory.
Alain is testing the Planet Solar Foundation's solar kayak, a first in Antarctica, in order to monitor green energy capacities in the polar regions.
The research stations could do with using much more solar energy than is being used at present, at least during the summer months, during the period of high activity in Antarctica. The potential of solar energy is, in my opinion, and from what we've seen here, totally underrated in Antarctica.
The goal of the foundation? To promote the use of solar energy and to prove all its potential in order to protect our climate against greenhouse gases. Fortunately, the new generation of scientists intends to carry out research while fully limiting their impact.
What's rather surprising when you look around is that the scenery is rather mineral, austere. You wouldn't think for a minute that there's a possibility that life can develop, but actually in Antarctica all life is underwater. And in general, we don't really know what actual ecological functions the gelatinous planktons have. But what certain researchers have noticed is that there are more and more jellyfish and gelatinous plankton, which is believed to be in response to the ongoing climate change taking place in the oceans. That's reflected by a rise in temperatures and anoxic zones, which are numerous zones where the ocean is depleted of oxygen, which prohibits the proliferation of life other than bacteria. A whole chain starts to be turned upside down. This might be life, but the increase of gelatinous plankton is not necessarily a good sign.
The next part of the trip towards the tip of the peninsula will undoubtedly shed light on the place of humans on this frozen continent. But on the way, nature reasserts itself. For several days, a storm blocks the boat in a sheltered bay. Before the last leg, Esperanza Base. When arriving from afar, you wonder if we can still talk about a base. Argentina has established a real town here.
The Argentinians clearly and openly claim this part of Antarctica, which isn't an insignificant one, and which is part of the continent, as we're actually on the Antarctica Peninsula. I think that symbolically it's a very clear message.
Even though we're on a land of peace, as with several stations, we're welcomed by soldiers.
People are asking, why are there military people on the base? It's because we're the only ones trained to face the conditions in Antarctica and give logistical support to the scientists. This is the reason why military uniforms and camouflage are banned, along with weapons and military exercises, but we provide logistical support.
And it's not for its scientific breakthroughs that this base is well known, but for the birth of children. The first one was born here in 1979, followed by 7 more newborns. This is symbolic of a country that is claiming sovereignty in Antarctica. And even if births stopped in the mid-1980s, people are still settling today with their families. In total, about 10 of them take up southern quarters for over a year. And everything has been planned to make their lives here feel a little bit like a home from home. Like this school, which welcomes around 10 children every year.
The program is the same, but we take into account the particularities of Antarctica. We make the most of our environment. We work on the wildlife, scientific studies. We capitalize on the support coming from the scientific studies. The scientists are not here, but we're connected via video conferencing. These are all the teachers and students from 1957 to 2019.
I think this is a rather remarkable place, thanks to the people here, and thanks to the way they organize the children's education, the way they plan the arrival of the children on site, and the families. It's a real town which takes into account the requirements of life in Antarctica and tries to put a certain number of people in the best position to understand the environment they find themselves in.
Being in the middle of the school break, the base is practically empty. Base leader Norman has stayed behind with his wife and 2 children. And in his opinion, even though the Argentinians want to hold on to their territorial claim, they're also the first ones to worry about the future of the treaty.
I think, and this is just a personal analysis, that Russia, the United States and China's interest isn't just a scientific one. And that's why we need the other countries, signatories of the Antarctic Treaty, to be resolute, to have a tough stance to make sure Antarctica stays the way it is today.
Before leaving the base, it's the turn of Laurence and her companions to be the subject of a question and answer session on the local radio.
This is the only radio that exists in Antarctica, a radio station which is connected to Argentina. Their communication capacities are noticeably superior to most stations found in Antarctica.
Each week, the radio broadcasts its own programs all over Argentina.
In the studio,
Laurence de la Ferrière, Helen Dubrasquet, et Alain Blanc.
Helen and Laurence are French, and Alain is Swiss. Welcome to Air 36. Welcome to the Esperanza base.
To start with, the objective of the expedition was to retrace the route of Antarctica's first explorers in such a way as to tell the story of Antarctica from a historical point of view, as well as a scientific point of view, and also an ecological one.
And the answers obtained throughout this journey cause concern for Laurence, especially regarding the ban on exploiting the resources in Antarctica.
There really is an urgent need to ensure that the treaty is re-signed beyond 2048, because they, like others, like the Chinese, like other stations, are clearly ready to claim a territory, and then it will be an open door to things that we can't even imagine today.
Will this natural preserve still be dedicated to peace and science for much longer? The planet's future and ours depend on it.